Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the Humanitarian Civil Military Coordination Workshop, jointly organized by the Disaster Management Center, the United Nations OCHA, which is facilitated by the World Food Programme in Sri Lanka. My name is Indu Aberatna, and I work as Program Policy Officer for Emergencies in the World Food Programme Sri Lanka. I wish that we had a very fruitful session yesterday. And my task here is today that reflect and recall module 1 and 2 of the previous day session to refresh you for the today's session. Well, we started the day by welcome and keynote address by the Major General Sudhantaran Singh, the Director General of the Disaster Management Center, preceded by introductory remarks by Joseph Reiterer, who is the leading facilitator for the Humanitarian Civil Military Coordination Workshop. Subsequently, leaning to the workshop proceedings, Joseph has taken the floor to make the introductory presentation and introductory remarks on the importance of civil military coordination in humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian assistance comprises on three key aspects: assistance, protection, and advocacy, especially in response to the humanitarian needs resulting complex emergencies. Further, we discussed about the very different settings, and in that settings, the interaction between humanitarian and military actors ranges from close cooperation and to the sharing coexistence. Moving to the next session, Anne Sophie has taken the floor to introduce the humanitarian assistance and military coordination, especially United Nations civil military coordination through the NIA approach, neutral, impartial humanitarian assistance, which talks about relationship to existing humanitarian civil military guidelines. And further, we discussed about purpose of the recommended practices for effective humanitarian civil military coordination, especially use of foreign military assets in natural and man-made disasters. We further discussed about Oslo guidelines and its applications, which is leaning to two main aspects of cooperation and coexistence. Then the floor has taken by Salin Chawar, which brings his insights, especially the applicability and use of the Oslo guidelines in earthquake in Haiti recently. And it was further discussed about role of humanitarian aid worker and the peacekeeper, so which are important aspects that we need to understand. Moving to the next session, that about UN Civil Military Coordination Guidelines, Ronaldo Riero taken the floor, and he brought use of various guidelines in the context, in different contexts, and application of those guidelines in different scenarios. So we further discussed about UN General Assembly resolution, MCDA guidelines on complex emergencies, which talks about three types of humanitarian assistance: direct, indirect, and infrastructure, which brought a concept of cookie, truck, and bridge. And moving further on about the UN Civil Military Coordination Guidelines, we heard from Melindi Mala about 13 key principles of United Nations Civil Military Coordination principles. One by one we have discussed, and further on we had a brainstorm session to prioritize or agree for three key humanitarian principles which are very much applicable for the Sri Lankan context. So do no harm approach in this. Out of all these key 13 principles, highlighted dominantly in many groups, so which is important mention. We further enlightened by once again Joseph about recommended practices on civil military coordination using foreign military assets, which talks about 5 areas of consideration: preparedness, deployment, employment, monitoring and evaluation, which we had further discussion and deliberation on these aspects. We further had a brainstorm session to identify what are the key agencies in the use of military assets in humanitarian assets, especially receiving foreign military assets and coordination of it, which was very interesting in that particular brainstorming session. We further discussed about the role of UN resident coordinator or UN humanitarian coordinator, presented by the Ronaldo Riero. And of course, we discussed about Hammock instrument, which is a new instrument brought into the action to facilitate the humanitarian civil military coordination in particular country setting, which is led by the national government agencies. So that is key aspect, especially when we are dealing with large scale disaster scenarios. Which talks about effective utilization of resources and providing prioritized humanitarian assistance where the need is most. Finally, Joseph once again taken the floor to further elaborate about military support for humanitarian assistance. We talked about three types of plan, three-pronged approach, which talks about centralized, decentralized, distributed humanitarian assistance. So in 5 areas that is being applied in this particular concept, which talks about information and military intelligence, harmonized planning, logistics and engineering, security, and direct humanitarian assistance. So I hope that was also a very interesting subject to end the first day, and which is very important that when we are working together with large number of actors in the humanitarian assistance. So with that, so I will end my recap and hand over back to Joseph. Thank you very much.